Were we really there? Sit back and judge the evidence for yourself. The most persistent conspiracy theory of the modern age unfolds right now.
Chapter 1. The Space Race, a war fought in shadows. The year was 1957, and the sky above America had never felt so threatening. On October 4th, a tiny silver sphere, no larger than a beach ball, pierced through the stratosphere and began circling the Earth at 17,000 miles per hour. Sputnik. The Soviets had placed an artificial satellite in orbit before the United States could even get one off the ground, and the psychological shockwave that followed was unlike anything the Cold War had yet produced. It wasn't just a satellite, it was a declaration, a message sent not in radio frequencies, but in fear. If the Soviets could put a machine in orbit, they could put a nuclear warhead over New York, over Washington, over every major American city with no warning and no defense.
The space race that followed was never really about science. It was never really about exploration, discovery, or the boundless curiosity of the human spirit, though that was the story they told the public, and it was a beautiful story, one worth believing. The truth, buried beneath layers of press releases and patriotic pageantry, was far simpler and far more brutal. Space was the new battlefield of the Cold War, and the nation that controlled the high ground of orbit controlled the psychological narrative of the age. Every rocket launch was a vote in the most consequential election in human history, not between political parties, but between competing visions of civilization itself. Capitalism versus communism, freedom versus tyranny, or so each side told itself.
The Soviets, emboldened by Sputnik, kept pushing the frontier. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human being in space, orbiting the Earth in 108 minutes aboard Vostok 1, and returning a hero to a nation that desperately needed one. The photographs of Gagarin smiling in his orange flight suit were beamed around the world, and in every American living room, every Pentagon office, every congressional chamber, the same question hung in the air like smoke. How are we losing this? How is the most powerful nation on Earth being humiliated by a country that 20 years ago couldn't feed itself?
President John F. Kennedy, young, charismatic, still reeling from the disaster of the Bay of Pigs invasion, needed a response that would capture the world's imagination. He needed something so audacious, so technically demanding, so visibly impossible that accomplishing it would end a debate entirely. On May 25, 1961, before a joint session of Congress, he issued his famous challenge. Before this decade is out, the United States would land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth. The crowd applauded, the cameras rolled, and somewhere in the corridors of NASA, engineers looked at each other with expressions that mixed excitement with barely contained terror. They didn't know how to do it. Not yet. Not even close.
What followed was the largest peacetime mobilization of scientific and industrial resources in American history. 400,000 scientists, engineers, contractors, and workers were recruited into the Apollo program. $25 billion, equivalent to over $260 billion in today's money, were poured into the effort. Entire new technologies had to be invented from scratch. Computer guidance systems, life support equipment capable of sustaining life in the harshest environment imaginable, rocket engines of unprecedented power, spacesuits that could withstand the vacuum of space and the extremes of lunar temperature. The Saturn V rocket, when completed, stood 36 stories tall and generated 7.6 million pounds of thrust at launch, a controlled explosion of almost incomprehensible force.
But here is the question that has haunted millions of people for more than half a century, the question that refuses to die no matter how many official explanations are offered, no matter how many scientists weigh in, no matter how many books are written. With everything at stake, with the most powerful nation on Earth betting its global prestige on success, with an adversary watching every step of the way, with a president's legacy riding on the outcome, would anyone have admitted failure, or would they have found another way to win?
Chapter 2: Stanley Kubrick and the Perfect Lie. In 1968, a film was released that changed cinema forever. 2001: A Space Odyssey, directed by Stanley Kubrick, presented space travel with a visual realism and technical accuracy that had never been achieved before in motion pictures. The scenes of astronauts floating in weightlessness, the stark beauty of the lunar surface, the cold silence of the vacuum. It was so convincing, so technically precise, that it raised an uncomfortable question that conspiracy theorists would eventually turn into an indictment. If Kubrick could make space look that real in 1968, could he have been hired by NASA to make a fake moon landing look real in 1969? The theory, stripped to its essentials, goes something like this. NASA knew that landing on the moon was extraordinarily dangerous, possibly impossible given the technology of the time. The Van Allen radiation belts, the extreme temperatures of the lunar surface, the problem of landing and relaunching a vehicle from another world. These were obstacles that might prove insurmountable. But the political stakes were too high for failure. Kennedy's promise had been made. Congressional funding depended on results, and so, according to the believers, a deal was struck in the deepest corridors of power. Kubrick, the most technically gifted filmmaker of his generation, would create a studio simulation of the moon landing, and the world would never know the difference.
The evidence cited by proponents is extensive, and at first glance, genuinely unsettling. Consider the lighting in the Apollo photographs. Any professional photographer will tell you that outdoor photography in direct sunlight produces harsh, deep shadows with clearly defined edges. The Apollo photographs, taken on the lunar surface where there is no atmosphere to scatter and diffuse light, should show exactly this: dramatic, razor-sharp shadows. And indeed, some shadows in the photographs do appear razor-sharp. But other shadows, in what should be the same lighting conditions, appear soft and filled with reflected light, as if secondary light sources were present. In a film studio, you would use reflectors and fill lights to achieve exactly this effect. On the moon, the conspiracy theorists ask, where is that fill light coming from? Then there is the famous waving flag. On July 20th, 1969, as Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin planted the American flag on the surface of the moon, footage shows the flag rippling and moving. But there is no air on the moon. There is no wind. How does a flag wave in a vacuum? The official explanation, that the flag had a horizontal rod along the top to keep it extended, and that the movement was caused by the astronauts handling it, is technically coherent. But conspiracy theorists point out that the flag movement appears too fluid, too sustained,
too natural for a flag that should stop moving the moment physical contact ceases. It looks, they say, exactly like a flag in a gentle breeze, which is exactly what you would have in a film studio with an air conditioning system.
The crosshairs are another puzzle that believers return to repeatedly. The cameras used by the Apollo astronauts had crosshairs, thin lines etched into the lens that should appear in front of every object in every photograph. They are built into the lens itself. They cannot be behind anything in the image. And yet, in certain Apollo photographs, the crosshairs appear to pass behind bright white objects, the flag, the lunar module, even astronaut suits. This optical impossibility, the theorists argue, is evidence of a composite photograph, an image assembled from multiple exposures in a dark room, where the crosshair layer was accidentally placed beneath the object layer. The most dramatic piece of supposed evidence linking Kubrick to the conspiracy is a video that circulated wildly after 1999, the year Kubrick died, conveniently unable to deny anything, in which a man resembling Kubrick appears to confess to filming the fake moon landing footage. This video, which many viewers accepted as genuine, was actually a mockumentary, a fictional film called Dark Side of the Moon, made by French director William Carell, in which actors played Henry Kissinger, Donald Rumsfeld, and Alexander Haig, appearing to corroborate the hoax. The credits revealed the joke, but by then, for millions of viewers who never saw the credits, the damage was done. The image of Kubrick confessing had lodged itself in the collective consciousness, and no amount of debunking could fully dislodge it.
Chapter 3: The Flags, the Shadows, and the Missing Stars.
Look at any photograph taken on the surface of the moon during the Apollo missions. Study it carefully, the way a detective examines a crime scene, looking not at what is there, but at what is missing. The landscape is stark, beautiful, alien, gray dust stretching to a curved horizon, rocky outcroppings, the black shadow of the lunar module falling across the surface, and above it all, sky. But what kind of sky? Not the sky you see from Earth, not that deep, rich, star-filled darkness that fills you with vertigo if you stare at it long enough on a clear night far from city lights. The sky in the Apollo photographs is black, featureless, empty. Not a single star is visible. This detail has struck millions of people as profoundly wrong. If the astronauts were in space, truly in space, beyond Earth's atmosphere, which is the only reason we don't see stars in daylight from the ground, why aren't the stars blazing overhead in their full glory? In space, there is no atmosphere to scatter sunlight and wash out the stars. Astronomers on the International Space Station routinely observe stars with astonishing clarity. So why, in every single photograph taken on the lunar surface, is the sky an absolute starless void?
The answer that NASA and every photographer and astronomer offers is technically unimpeachable, but emotionally unsatisfying, which is perhaps why conspiracy theorists keep ignoring it. Exposure settings. The cameras used by the Apollo astronauts were calibrated to photograph the brightly sunlit lunar surface. On the moon, without atmosphere to filter it, the sun's light falls with full intensity on everything: the surface, the equipment, the astronauts' white suits. To correctly expose a photograph in those conditions, you need a very fast shutter speed and a small aperture. The same settings you would use to photograph a white beach on a clear summer day. At those settings, stars, which emit light millions of times dimmer than the reflected sunlight from the lunar surface, are simply invisible. They fall far below the camera's exposure threshold. You cannot photograph a brightly lit landscape and stars simultaneously with any standard camera in space or on Earth. This is basic photography.
But the conspiracy theorists have a counter-argument. It's not just the stars that trouble them, it's the shadows. On the lunar surface, far from any mountains or large structures that could reflect sunlight, you would expect shadows to be parallel. The sun is so far away that its light arrives at Earth and Moon as essentially parallel rays, the same way you can see in the parallel shadows cast by fence posts on a sunny day on Earth. But in several Apollo photographs, shadows appear to fall in slightly different directions. The theorists say this is impossible with a single distant light source, the sun. It would only be possible if there were multiple nearby light sources, like studio lights arranged at different angles around a set.
The official explanation involves terrain. Even a gentle slope in the lunar surface, invisible in a flat photograph, can cause shadows to appear to diverge when they're actually parallel lines falling on uneven ground. The same phenomenon is observable and demonstrable on Earth. Photograph fence posts on a hillside, and their shadows will appear to point in different directions, even in perfectly parallel sunlight. Additionally, light reflected from the bright lunar surface fills in shadows the way a reflector board fills in shadows in professional photography, creating the soft, detail-filled shadow areas that conspiracy theorists interpret as evidence of studio fill lighting. These explanations are correct, but they require a level of technical knowledge that most people don't carry in their daily lives, and they ask you to trust experts in fields, photography, optics, lunar geology, that most people have no independent way of evaluating. And therein lies the deepest appeal of the moon landing conspiracy. It exploits the gap between what ordinary people can see with their own eyes and what experts claim is true. You look at the photographs and something feels wrong. The experts tell you your eyes are deceiving you, and in an age when trust in institutions has been eroded by decades of genuine deception, Vietnam, Watergate, weapons of mass destruction, the experts asking you to trust them face a fundamentally hostile audience.
Chapter 4. The Van Allen Belt, a deadly barrier they claimed to cross. In 1958, James Van Allen, an astrophysicist at the University of Iowa, made a discovery that would become one of the most enduring weapons in the arsenal of moon landing conspiracy theorists. Using instruments aboard the first successful American satellite, Explorer 1, Van Allen detected something extraordinary. Surrounding Earth like a pair of invisible donuts, extending from about 600 miles above the surface to a distance of 37,000 miles, were two enormous regions of intense radiation. Electrically charged particles, protons and electrons trapped by Earth's magnetic field, forming belts of radiation intense enough to damage electronic equipment and, more relevantly, to kill human beings. The discovery was celebrated as a triumph of early space science. Van Allen was honored, his discovery named after him. And then, 11 years later, NASA claimed to have sent human beings through these lethal radiation belts, not once, but 6 times, in flimsy aluminum capsules with no shielding beyond what a 1960s spacecraft could provide, and that every single crew member survived without lasting harm. To conspiracy theorists, this claim is the single most technically implausible aspect of the entire Apollo program. It is the place where the physics, they say, simply does not add up.
The argument runs as follows. The Van Allen belts are genuinely lethal to unshielded human beings. A dose of radiation sufficient to cause acute radiation sickness, nausea, hair loss, immune system collapse, organ failure, death is measured in grays.
The inner Van Allen belt, at its most intense, contains radiation levels capable of delivering a lethal dose within hours. The Apollo astronauts passed through these belts on their way to the moon and back. Even if the transit was rapid, approximately 30 minutes through the most intense regions at the speeds the Apollo spacecraft traveled, the radiation exposure should have been significant. How did they survive? NASA's answer involves trajectory planning and dose calculation. The Apollo trajectories were specifically designed to minimize time spent in the most intense radiation regions. The spacecraft passed through the outer edges of the belts, where radiation intensity is significantly lower, and the transit was rapid. The total radiation dose received by Apollo astronauts was elevated above the Earth's surface baseline, approximately 1.14 rads for Apollo 11, but within the range that the human body can absorb without acute effects. For context, a chest CT scan delivers approximately 0.7 rads. The Apollo dose was roughly equivalent to a few chest X-rays, elevated certainly, but not lethal, not even close to the doses that cause acute radiation sickness.
But here is where the conspiracy theorists dig in, and where the argument becomes genuinely interesting for anyone willing to follow the technical details. The radiation environment of the Van Allen belts is not uniform. It varies with solar activity, with position within the belts, with specific energy levels of the particles encountered. Some researchers have argued that NASA's published dose calculations are far too low, that the actual radiation environment during the Apollo transit was significantly more intense than official records suggest. These arguments have been made not just by fringe bloggers, but by scientists, including, controversially, some with relevant credentials, who claim that the dose figures in NASA's records do not match what independent models of the belt radiation environment would predict. The debunkers respond with what they consider the decisive argument: dosimeters. The Apollo astronauts carried personal radiation dosimeters, devices that record accumulated radiation exposure throughout their missions. These devices recorded doses consistent with NASA's claims. They could not have been tampered with without leaving obvious evidence, and the calculations are confirmed by independent radiation physicists who have no stake in the outcome. Furthermore, modern astronauts on the International Space Station, which orbits within the inner fringes of the radiation environment, accumulate radiation doses over 6-month missions that dwarf what the Apollo astronauts received, and they return to Earth healthy. Yet the Van Allen belt argument persists, and perhaps the reason it persists is that it touches something psychologically deep. The image of fragile human beings sealed in a tin can, passing through invisible walls of lethal radiation on their way to another world. It should feel impossible. It almost defies the intuition that they emerged unharmed, that the math says they would emerge unharmed, requires a level of trust in calculations and instruments that most people have no way to independently verify. And so the doubt grows in the dark, feeding on uncertainty, nourished by distrust.
Chapter 5: The Astronauts Who Wouldn't Swear on the Bible.
In 2002, on a street in Beverly Hills, a man named Bart Sibrel approached Buzz Aldrin, the second human being ever to walk on the surface of another world, and shoved a Bible in his face. Aldrin was 72 years old. Sibrel was a documentary filmmaker who had spent years producing content claiming that the moon landings were faked. He had already confronted several Apollo astronauts in a similar fashion, demanding that they place their hand on the Bible and swear before God that they had actually walked on the moon. Some of the astronauts had walked away. Some had told him in polite or less polite terms to leave him alone. But Buzz Aldrin, after sustained harassment, Sibrel called him a coward, a liar, and a thief who had stolen public money, swung his fist and connected solidly with Sibrel's jaw. The footage went viral years before the word viral entered the internet vocabulary. The police were called. Sibrel declined to press charges. He was widely judged to have deserved exactly what he got. The incident became one of the most discussed moments in the history of the moon hoax debate. To the conspiracy theorists, Aldrin's punch was proof of guilt. Why would an innocent man react with such fury to a simple question? Why not just laugh it off, sign the Bible, and walk away? The argument has the seductive logic of all unfalsifiable positions. Any response to the accusation can be interpreted as evidence of the accusation's truth. Calm denial? He's been trained to deny it. Anger? He's hiding something. Walking away without comment? He can't face the truth.
But the astronaut's broader behavior over the decades provides a more complex picture than the conspiracy theorists typically acknowledge. Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon, became famously reclusive after Apollo 11. He returned to Ohio, became a professor of aerospace engineering, and steadfastly avoided the celebrity that his achievements should have brought him. He gave very few interviews, declined most appearances, and spoke of his experience on the moon with a restraint that struck some observers as almost pathological. His authorized biography, written by James Hansen after years of access, reveals a man who was profoundly affected by his experience, but also a man of extraordinary personal reserve, an engineer's engineer who was uncomfortable with the mythological status thrust upon him. To conspiracy theorists, Armstrong's reclusiveness is suspicious. A man who had genuinely walked on the moon, who had done something so extraordinary that it defined all of human history, should be eager to discuss it, to revel in it, to share it. His retreat from public life suggests guilt, they say. The truth is more banal and more human. Armstrong was an intensely private man who found the relentless scrutiny of his achievements suffocating. He had done the thing. It was done. The attention that followed felt to him like an endless performance of something that was, to him, a completed act of engineering and courage. What the conspiracy theorists rarely engage with seriously is the psychological profile of the Apollo astronauts as a group. 12 men, drawn from the most elite military and academic environments in the country, selected through a process of extraordinary rigor, who spent years training for missions that put their lives at genuine risk, and who collectively maintained, for more than 50 years, perfect consistency in their accounts of what happened. Not one of them, in private correspondence or public statements or deathbed confessions, has ever broken from the official narrative. Not one. In a conspiracy involving hundreds of thousands of people, as the full moon hoax theory requires, the probability of half a century of perfect silence is, by any statistical measure, essentially zero.
Chapter 6. NASA's Smoking Guns. Evidence they can't explain.
The lost tapes. Of all the pieces of evidence that conspiracy theorists cite, this is the one that NASA itself cannot fully explain away, because NASA has already admitted to the essential facts. In 2009, NASA acknowledged that it could not locate the original high-quality video footage from the Apollo 11 moon landing. Approximately 13,000 reels of telemetry data, including the original slow-scan television recordings of Armstrong's first steps on the moon, had been recorded over in the 1970s and 1980s. The tapes were reused because NASA was facing storage shortages.
The footage that the world watched on July 20, 1969, the ghostly, low-resolution images of a man in a white suit descending a ladder in the Sea of Tranquility, was derived from a converted version of the original signal, not the original signal itself. NASA has been admirably transparent about this records management failure. The agency commissioned a project to find the missing tapes, employed professional archivists, searched storage facilities worldwide, and ultimately concluded that the original tapes were gone. Restored footage, produced in 2009 using the best available copies and modern digital enhancement technology, was released for the 50th anniversary of the landing. But the originals are gone. To conspiracy theorists, this is not a records management failure. It is the deliberate destruction of evidence. If the moon landing had actually occurred, the original tapes would be among the most precious artifacts in human history. The only explanation, the theorists argue, that accounts for the deliberate destruction of irreplaceable footage is that the footage contains something that someone, somewhere needed to ensure would never be seen at full resolution by a modern image analysis software.
One of the most persistent anomalies concerns the dust behavior during the lunar module's landing and takeoff. The conspiracy theorists argue that when the lunar module's descent engine should have blasted the lunar surface with its exhaust plume, the landing footage shows no crater beneath the engine and no visible flame from the exhaust. How can a rocket engine powerful enough to land a spacecraft on the moon leave no crater and produce no visible flame? The answer involves the specifics of rocket engine operation in a vacuum. The lunar module's descent engine burned a mixture of hydrazine and nitrogen tetroxide, a fuel combination whose exhaust is nearly colorless and invisible. And the engine's thrust was being throttled down to nearly zero at the moment of landing, not because the engine was barely working, but because the spacecraft had already slowed to nearly zero velocity and needed only minimal thrust to maintain that state during the final feat of descent. A minimal thrust engine produces minimal exhaust velocity, which disperses in all directions in the vacuum rather than digging a crater. NASA has never returned to the moon since the final Apollo 17 mission in December 1972. To many conspiracy theorists, this silence, this half-century of absence, is the most damning evidence of all. If going to the moon was technically achievable in 1969, why hasn't anyone done it since? The official explanations involve budget cuts, shifting political priorities, the rise of robotic exploration, and the enormous cost of human spaceflight. But to those who doubt the original achievement, they read as admissions of impossibility, as the unspoken acknowledgement that the feat was never actually accomplished in the first place.
Chapter 7. Why the government had every reason to fake it.
Let us, for a moment, try to think like a conspiracy theorist. Not to endorse the conclusion, but to understand the architecture of the belief. If you were the President of the United States in 1969, and if you had committed the full weight of American prestige to landing on the moon by the end of the decade, and if you were now facing the possibility that your engineers might fail, that the mission might end in disaster, in the deaths of astronauts broadcast live to 600 million television viewers, in the most catastrophic public humiliation in American history, what would you do? This is not a hypothetical question. The Apollo 1 fire of January 27, 1967, killed 3 astronauts, Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee, during a routine test on the launch pad. It was a brutal reminder that the program was operating at the absolute edge of human capability,
and that catastrophic failure was always possible. The Watergate scandal, which erupted 3 years after the moon landing, demonstrated conclusively that the Nixon administration was capable of elaborate conspiracies at the highest levels of government, and that the cover-up could be maintained for years with the cooperation of dozens of people across multiple agencies. The Pentagon Papers, published in 1971, revealed that successive administrations had systematically deceived the American public about the conduct and prospects of the Vietnam War for years. These were not distant historical events when Bill Kaysing published his Moon Hoax book in 1976. They were fresh wounds in the American body politic, visible proof that the government could and did lie to its own people about matters of the gravest national importance.
The argument from motive is the part of the conspiracy theory that is genuinely difficult to dismiss with a wave of the hand, because the motive is real, documented, and human. The space race was not primarily a scientific endeavor. It was a propaganda operation, a highly sophisticated, enormously expensive, magnificently successful piece of geopolitical theater designed to demonstrate the superiority of the American system over the Soviet system. Every mission was a performance. Every photograph was a communication to the world. The pressure to succeed was not just institutional, but existential. It was bound up with the American sense of itself, with the post-World War II belief that democracy and capitalism were destined to triumph over the darkness of totalitarianism. Failure was not just professionally catastrophic, it was ideologically catastrophic. And the technical capacity to create convincing fakery existed. The 1968 release of 2001: A Space Odyssey demonstrated that photorealistic space environments could be created with 1960s filmmaking technology. The United States Air Force had an extensive classified film production capability. The CIA had for years been engaged in elaborate deception operations of extraordinary sophistication. The infrastructure for a large-scale media deception was not merely plausible, it was already in existence, deployed in service of other operations. The pieces were all there, the motive was there, the capacity was there. What about the hundreds of thousands of people who worked on the Apollo program? Could all of them have been part of a conspiracy? This is the most common objection to the hoax theory, and it is a powerful one. A conspiracy involving even 10,000 people would be statistically almost certain to have produced a leak within 50 years. The hoax theorists have an answer, of course: compartmentalization. Not every worker needed to know the truth. Only a small inner circle, perhaps a few dozen people at the very highest levels, would need to know the actual nature of the operation. The workers at Cape Canaveral, the technicians at Mission Control, the engineers designing the lunar module, they might all have been doing exactly what they thought they were doing. Only the ultimate destination, the theorists argue, was false.
Chapter 8. The moon landings were real. Or were they?
Here is the hardest thing about the moon landing hoax theory. It makes you think. Not because it is correct. The evidence that the moon landings actually occurred is overwhelming, multi-sourced, independently verifiable, and cannot be explained by any coherent hoax hypothesis. But because the psychological and political questions it raises are genuine, and because the process of working through the evidence forces you to confront how much of your knowledge of the world you hold on faith rather than direct verification. The Soviet Union tracked the Apollo missions with its own independent radar, radio telescopes, and communications equipment. The Soviets had every possible political incentive to expose a fraud. It would have been the most devastating propaganda victory of the Cold War, proof before the entire world that America had lied, that the Apollo program was theater, that the stars and stripes planted on the lunar surface was a stage prop and not a symbol of genuine achievement. The Soviet space program's directors, their scientists, their intelligence apparatus, all of them monitored the Apollo missions in real time, and none of them, not during the Cold War, not after the Soviet Union's collapse when many classified documents were released, not in the decades of post-Soviet openness, ever produced a shred of evidence suggesting that the landings were staged. They accepted them as real. In a world where the USSR would have shouted any evidence of American deception from every rooftop, their silence is not just meaningful, it is conclusive.
The retroreflectors. On the lunar surface at the landing sites of Apollo 11, 14, and 15, laser retroreflectors were deployed, panels of specialized mirrors designed to reflect laser beams precisely back to their source. Since 1969, observatories around the world, in France, Italy, Germany, Japan, and the United States, have been firing laser pulses at these retroreflectors and timing their return to precisely measure the Earth-Moon distance. The retroreflectors are still there, still working, still returning signals. Any person with access to the appropriate laser equipment can verify their existence independently. They did not arrive on the Moon by themselves. The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, launched by NASA in 2009, has photographed all 6 Apollo landing sites from lunar orbit. The images show the descent stages of the lunar modules, the scientific equipment left behind, and, at sufficient resolution, the tracks left in the lunar soil by the astronauts themselves as they walked across the surface. Multiple independent nations now have lunar orbital programs capable of photographing the Apollo sites. China's Change program has orbited the Moon. India's Chandrayaan-3 landed near the lunar South Pole in 2023. None of these programs has found anything inconsistent with the Apollo missions having occurred exactly as described. The Moon rocks, 382 kilograms of lunar material brought back by Apollo, have been studied by scientists in dozens of countries. Their mineralogy is unique: no water, no organic compounds, minerals that do not form in any known Earth geological environment. Soviet robotic missions to the Moon return their own samples, and the mineralogy matches the Apollo samples perfectly. The rocks could not have been fabricated.
And yet, the theory persists. A 2018 survey found that 57% of Russians doubted the moon landings. A 2019 UK survey found 16% believed they were faked. In certain demographics in the United States, doubt is substantially higher than the overall 5 to 10% national average. Why does a theory persist in the face of evidence that should, by any rational standard, be sufficient to settle the question? The answer lives not in the evidence, but in the psychology of the age. We live in an era of institutional collapse, a period in which trust in governments, media, corporations, and scientific establishments has been eroded by decades of genuine failures, genuine deceptions, and genuine abuses of power. In that environment, the moon landing hoax theory performs a specific emotional function.
It offers a coherent narrative about a world in which the powerful lie systematically to the powerless, a world in which the official story is always suspect, a world in which the citizen who questions authority is not a crank but a hero. That narrative is not without some basis in reality. Governments do lie, institutions do deceive. The historical record contains genuine conspiracies of extraordinary scope. But the moon landing hoax theory is not one of them. Somewhere out there, on the surface of the moon, a flag stands still in the airless dark. Whether it was put there by human hands in 1969, or whether it is something else entirely, that is a question only you can answer for yourself. The question that the moon landing hoax theory ultimately forces us to ask is not whether we went to the moon. The question it forces us to ask is, in a world where governments have systematically lied about wars, surveillance, and weapons programs, how do we distinguish between the conspiracy theories that are true and the ones that are false? How do we maintain the capacity for rational skepticism without descending into a paralysis where nothing can be trusted and everything is suspect? These are not easy answers, and the fact that the moon landing hoax continues to command belief from millions of intelligent, thoughtful people suggests that the answers we've found so far are not good enough.